My daughter-in-law changed my Netflix password. I reviewed every document he'd had me sign for 10 years. I am 71 years old and I have buried a husband, raised a son, and kept my mouth shut for 10 years longer than any woman should ever keep her mouth shut. My name is Barbara, and what I am about to tell you happened this week. Not last year. Not a decade ago. This week. And by the time I finish telling you every single detail, you are going to understand exactly why I did what I did. And you are going to understand that some women do not get mad. Some women get even in ways that take 10 years to set up without even knowing they were setting it up. Started with Netflix. Yes, Netflix. A streaming service. That is what finally broke the dam that had been holding back 10 years of swallowed words and bitten tongue and forced smiles at Christmas dinners where I sat at my own table and felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. It was a Tuesday morning. I remember because I always watch my shows on Tuesday morning. Richard goes to work early, Melissa sleeps in late because Melissa does not work. Melissa has never worked a day since she married my son, and I sit in my chair with my coffee and I watch my programs. It is the one quiet pleasure of my day. It is the 1 hour where nobody needs anything from me and nobody is looking at me with that particular expression Melissa has perfected. The one that is not quite a smile and not quite a sneer but lives in the territory somewhere between the two. I picked up the remote. I opened Netflix. And the screen told me my password was incorrect. I thought I had made a mistake. I am 71 and I am not too proud to admit that sometimes my fingers hit the wrong letters. So I tried again. Incorrect. I tried a third time. Incorrect. And then I looked at the little text beneath the password box and it said, in very small but very clear letters, that this account had been updated recently, and I should contact the account holder for new login information. The account holder. The account was in my name. This house is in my name. The internet that runs through this house is in my name. The Netflix subscription that gets charged to the card in my name every single month has been in my name since the day Richard set it up 3 years ago and asked me to put it on my card because it was easier. Because it was always easier to use my card. Because that is how things worked in this house, in this family. Things were always easier when Barbara handled it. But the password had been changed. And the person who changed it was not Barbara. I sat in my chair for a moment. Very still. I am good at being very still. I have had a lot of practice. I set down my coffee cup and I sat there in the quiet of that Tuesday morning and something moved through me that was not quite anger. Anger is hot. What moved through me was cold. It was the cold of someone who has finally, been given the last small piece of a puzzle she has been assembling without realizing it for 10 years. I did not knock on Melissa's door. I did not send Richard a message at work. I did not go online to reset the password, though I could have, because the email address attached to that account was mine. I sat in my chair and I thought. I thought about that puzzle. I thought about the pieces. And then I got up, went to my bedroom, opened the closet, pushed past the winter coats, and pulled out a cardboard box that has been sitting on the top shelf for 10 years. A box I had nearly thrown away 3 times. A box I had kept because Richard's father, my late husband Gerald, God rest him, had once told me to never throw away paper. Never, he said. Paper tells the truth even when people do not. Gerald was a quiet man, but he was a wise one. Inside that box were documents. 10 years of documents. Every single piece of paper that Richard had ever placed in front of me and asked me to sign. And sitting there on my bed with that box open, I began to read every single one of them for the first time. Now you need to understand something. When your child places a paper in front of you and says, "Mom, this is just a formality, Mom, this is just paperwork, Mom, you do not need to read all of it, just sign here," you trust them. Because they are your child. Because you looked at this person when they were 3 years old and you knew every thought in their head and you thought you still knew every thought in their head even though they are now 34 and married to a woman who changes your Netflix password on a Tuesday morning while you are sitting in your chair minding your own business. I trusted Richard. I signed what Richard placed in front of me. I signed quickly and I smiled and I said, "Of course, whatever you need." And I meant it every time because I thought he needed my help and helping my son was the one thing in this world I knew how to do without hesitation. But I sat on that bed with that box and I began to read. And the cold feeling that had started in my chair got colder with every page. The first document I really read, truly read word by word, was something Richard had asked me to sign about 4 years ago. He had called it a co-signer agreement. He said it was for a business loan he was trying to get and that the bank just needed a family member to sign, and it was nothing, it was a formality. They would never actually come after me because the business was doing well. I had signed it. I had not read it. It was 6 pages long, and he was sitting there tapping his fingers on the table, and Melissa was in the kitchen making noise with dishes in that particular way she made noise with dishes when she wanted something to happen faster. I read it on Tuesday. All 6 pages. Slowly. And what I discovered was that I had not co-signed a business loan. I had, according to those 6 pages, signed something that made me equally liable for a debt of $230,000. The business was called Meridian Holdings LLC. I had never heard that name before in my life. The loan was taken from a private lender, not a bank. The interest rate was printed in a font so small I had to get my reading glasses and then get up and get my magnifying glass on top of that. The interest rate made my hands cold. I set that document down. I picked up the next one. The next one was from about 6 years ago. Richard had told me it was an insurance form. Something to do with a policy he was updating, and he needed my signature because some assets were in my name. I had signed it at the kitchen table while Melissa sat across from me talking about a vacation she and Richard were planning, and I remember being distracted by the vacation details because it sounded like a very expensive vacation, and I was wondering if they needed money, and if I should offer before they asked. What I had signed was not an insurance form. It was a deed transfer. Not a full transfer, but a partial interest transfer, granting Richard a 50% stake in the house I have lived in since 1989. The house Gerald and I bought together. The house I paid off myself after Gerald passed. My house. And I had signed away half of it at the kitchen table, while listening to vacation plans, with my name on the line and Melissa's voice in my ears and my pen moving across the paper the way it always moved because Richard needed it and I trusted Richard. I had to stop reading. I went to the kitchen and I made another cup of coffee, and I stood at the window looking at the backyard where Richard used to play when he was small, and I let myself feel the thing I was feeling, and the thing I was feeling was grief. Not anger. Not yet. Grief. Because this was not a stranger who had done these things. This was my son. My Richard. The boy I raised. And I was standing in my kitchen holding a coffee cup and understanding something about my son that I had not understood before, and hoping with everything in me that the understanding was wrong, that I was reading something wrong, that there was an explanation, because the alternative was something I could not yet name without my hands shaking. I went back to the box. The third document I read was dated 9 years ago. 9 years ago I had signed something Richard told me was a medical directive update. He said it was related to some estate planning advice he had gotten, and it was just sensible, just good sense, just the kind of thing adults do to make sure everything was in order. I had nodded. I had thought it was mature and responsible of him to think about these things. I had been proud of him. I had signed. What I had signed was not a medical directive update. What I had signed was a document that named Richard as the sole beneficiary of all assets held in my name, superseding my previous will, which had divided my estate between Richard and a charitable fund for a children's hospital that Gerald had cared deeply about. The charitable fund was gone from this new document. Everything went to Richard. And the signature line had me listed not as the maker of the document but as a witness. My own estate document, and I was listed as a witness to my own instructions. I had not caught it when I signed. I had not been reading. I had been trusting. I sat in my bedroom for a long time after that. The box was in my lap and the papers were spread around me on the bed, and the afternoon was coming in through the curtains, and I was 71 years old, and I was finally reading the story of the last 10 years of my life as it had actually been lived, not as I had believed it was lived. Richard came home at 6. I heard his car in the driveway. I heard the front door. I heard him call out, "Mom, I'm home," the way he always did, cheerful, easy, uncomplicated. The voice of a man who believed everything was fine. The voice of a man who had no idea his mother had spent the afternoon reading. Melissa came downstairs. I heard the two of them in the kitchen. The refrigerator opening. The sound of them talking low, the way couples talk when they think no one can hear, not the content, just the tone, easy and familiar and conspiratorial in the way that all couples are conspiratorial in their own kitchen. I put the documents back in the box. Neatly. In order. I put the box back in the closet behind the winter coats. I went to the bathroom, looked at myself in the mirror for a moment, and then went downstairs to have dinner with my son and my daughter-in-law as if it were any other Tuesday. Dinner was pasta. Melissa had not made it. She had ordered it from a restaurant and put it in serving dishes so it looked like she had made it. This was something she had been doing for years, and Richard either believed she cooked or pretended to believe she cooked, and either way it was not my business. I ate the pasta. I listened to Richard talk about his day. I watched Melissa pick at her food and scroll her phone and smile at whatever she was looking at, and occasionally show the phone to Richard, who would glance at it and nod. At no point did anyone mention Netflix. At no point did Melissa look at me with anything other than her usual expression, the one that lived between a smile and something else. After dinner I said I was tired and I went upstairs and I lay in my bed in the dark and I did not sleep, and I thought about Gerald and what he would say. Gerald, who told me never to throw away paper. Gerald, who died before he could see what his son became, or before he could see what I should have seen sooner. I like to think Gerald would have been sad. I do not like to think about what else Gerald might have been. In the morning I called a lawyer. Not a lawyer Richard knew. Not a lawyer from this town. Because this town is small enough that everyone knows everyone, and I did not know who might mention something to someone who might mention it to Richard. I called a lawyer in the city. I had found her name online the night before. Lying in the dark with my phone, searching carefully, specifically, for an attorney who handled elder financial abuse cases. Because that was the phrase I had found in the long hours of that Tuesday night that fit what I was reading in those documents. Elder financial abuse. The law has a name for it. The law takes it seriously. I had not known that. I know it now. Her name was Patricia Chan, and she had been practicing for 22 years, and she had a website that was very calm and very clear and said, in plain language, that if a family member had manipulated an older adult into signing documents without full understanding of their content, that was not just a family problem. That was a legal one. I had an appointment for Thursday. I spent Wednesday as if nothing had changed. I made breakfast. I watched my programs. Melissa had changed the Netflix password, but I reset it from my email because it was my account on my email, and she had not thought that far ahead, or she had not thought I would think that far ahead, and I watched my programs and I drank my coffee and I was very pleasant and very normal. Melissa came downstairs at 11 in her robe and poured coffee and stood at the counter and looked at her phone, and at one point said without looking up, "Oh, I updated some of the streaming passwords. I'll send them to you." And I said, "Oh, thank you, that is so thoughtful," and she nodded and went back to her phone, and I looked at her over my coffee cup and I thought about 10 years of paper. Wednesday evening Richard came home and we all watched television together in the living room, and at some point Richard put his arm around Melissa on the couch and they looked comfortable and easy, the way people look when they believe they are safe. When they believe the ground beneath them is solid. When they do not know that someone has spent 2 days reading. I went to bed and I slept. Thursday morning I drove to the city. Patricia Chen's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown, and she had a firm handshake, and she did not waste time on small talk, and I appreciated both of those things very much. I put the box on her desk. She looked at it. She asked me if she could look through it. I said that was why I had brought it. She read. She was fast. She had the practiced eyes of someone who reads documents the way other people read faces, quickly, knowing what to look for, knowing where the meaning hides. She pulled out certain papers and set them aside and made notes, and twice she looked up at me over her glasses with an expression that I can only describe as professional concern, which is a particular kind of concern that carries within it the suggestion that what you are concerned about is real and serious and not something you have imagined. When she finished, she folded her hands on the desk and she told me several things. She told me that the co-signer document was real and legally binding, but that because I had not been given time to read it and because it had been misrepresented to me at signing, there were grounds to challenge it. She told me the deed transfer was similarly challengeable on grounds of misrepresentation, and that in her opinion a competent court would look seriously at the circumstances under which a 71-year-old woman had signed away 50% of her home while being talked at about vacation plans. She told me the beneficiary document had a structural problem she wanted to look at more carefully, but that the way I was listed as a witness to my own estate instructions was, in her words, irregular in a way that raised questions. She asked me what I wanted. I told her I wanted my house back. I wanted my name on my own estate again the way I had intended it. I wanted the co-signer agreement resolved in a way that did not leave me liable for a debt I had not knowingly taken on. And I told her I wanted to understand exactly what Meridian Holdings LLC was, because I had looked it up the night before and I had found very little about it, which seemed strange for a company that had borrowed $230,000. Patricia Chen nodded as I said each thing. When I mentioned Meridian Holdings, she made a particular note and underlined it. She told me she had a colleague who specialized in business entity research and that she would like to bring him in. I said that was fine. I drove home. I made lunch. Melissa was on the patio on her phone. I waved to her through the glass door. She waved back without looking up. I ate my lunch at the kitchen table and I looked at the patio and I thought about the years I had spent in this house serving as the foundation beneath people who did not know the foundation was paying attention. Over the next several days Patricia and her colleague were working and I was living my life as if my life were exactly what it had always been. I was friendly at dinner. I asked Richard about his work and he told me things about his work in the way he always did, confidently, with the particular ease of someone who has been trusted so long by the person they are talking to that they no longer even notice the trust. It has become invisible and assumed. Melissa mentioned the Netflix password again, sent me a new one in a text, and I thanked her and added it to my phone and used it and said nothing and felt nothing on the outside, and on the inside I was a woman who was very quietly waiting. Patricia's colleague found Meridian Holdings LLC in 4 days. What he found was interesting. Meridian Holdings LLC had been registered 6 years ago. Its 2 members, meaning its 2 owners, were Richard and a person named Derek Paulson. I did not know Derek Paulson. The company had borrowed money multiple times. The company had also transferred money multiple times. Some of those transfers had gone to accounts Patricia's colleague was still tracing. The company had no employees. The company appeared, as far as he could determine, to do nothing that could be described as a conventional business activity. He used the phrase shell entity when he called me to give me an update, and I asked him what that meant and he explained it and I said I see and I thanked him and I sat with my phone in my lap and I looked at the wall. My son had not borrowed money for a business. My son had borrowed money, using my name to secure it, for something that was not a business in any recognizable sense. And that money had gone somewhere and Patricia's colleague was still looking at where it had gone and I was sitting in my house, the house I have lived in since 1989, thinking about a boy I raised who had become a man I apparently did not know. I want to be honest with you. There were nights during this period when I thought about going to Richard directly, sitting him down, saying I found the box, I read the documents, I went to a lawyer. There were nights when I thought maybe this was a misunderstanding, maybe there was an explanation. Maybe the paper said what they said, but the story they told was not the story I was reading. I am his mother. Mothers look for the other story. Mothers hope for the version where their child is not who the evidence says they might be. But then I would think about the deed transfer. About signing 50% of my home away while listening to vacation plans. About the fact that he had never told me. Not in 10 years. He had never said, "Mom, do you remember that paper you signed? I want to explain what it was." He had never said, "Mom, I want to make sure you understand what I've been asking you to sign." He had never said anything. He had just moved to the next paper when the next paper was needed and placed it in front of me and tapped his fingers on the table while I signed. That was not a misunderstanding. So I let Patricia work and I waited and I lived my life. She called me 2 weeks after our first meeting. She had filed a petition to review the deed transfer on grounds of misrepresentation and undue influence. She had a motion ready regarding the co-signer document pending more information on Meridian Holdings. She had referred the estate document question to a colleague who handled that specific area of law. And she wanted to tell me that her colleague had traced one significant transfer from Meridian Holdings to an account in Melissa's name. An account in Melissa's name. I sat with that information for a while. I had thought when I started this that I was dealing with Richard making bad choices. Richard cutting corners. Richard using his mother's name for something she should not have been involved in. I had not fully considered Melissa as an architect. I had thought of her as someone who went along, who benefited, who was complicit by proximity. But an account in her name with money transferred into it from a company built in part with my signature, that was a different kind of involvement. Patricia said she was not drawing conclusions yet. She said she was presenting me with information, and that conclusions would come as the picture got clearer. She was very precise about the difference between presenting information and drawing conclusions, and I respected that precision very much. I asked her what happened next. She told me that within the next 2 weeks Richard would be served with legal notice of the petition regarding the deed transfer. This was not avoidable. This was how the process worked. He would know that I had filed. He would know I had a lawyer. He would know I had read the documents. I asked if I should leave the house before that happened. She said that was my choice. She said legally the house was still primarily mine and I had no obligation to leave. She said that in her experience, when family members were served in these situations, reactions varied. She said I should think about my comfort and safety and make decisions accordingly. I told her I would stay in the house. This is my house. I will not leave my house because of papers someone had me sign without reading. I will not be moved from the place I have lived since 1989 because someone thought I was too old and too trusting to notice. I am 71. I notice everything. I have been noticing for 71 years. I just stopped pretending not to notice. Richard was served on a Thursday morning. I know this because Patricia's office called to confirm service. I was sitting in my chair with my coffee when Richard called me. I heard his car pull up outside. He had clearly come home from wherever he was the moment he was served, and his call came through before he even got to the front door. I let it ring. He knocked on the front door of his own house, the house he partially owned on paper, and I went to the door and I opened it and he was standing there with the legal documents in his hand and his face was doing something complicated. He is 34 years old and he looked younger than he has looked in years and also older at the same time, which is what happens to a face when it is doing complicated things. He said, "Mom, what is this?" I said, "Come inside." He came inside. I sat down in my chair. He stood across from me. Melissa was not there. I do not know where she was. I did not ask. He said he wanted to explain. He said some of the documents were not what they looked like. He said it was complicated. He said he had always intended to fix things, to make things right, he just had not gotten around to it. He said he never meant for me to be on the hook for anything. He said the deed thing was just a technicality. He said he did not realize I had not understood what I was signing. He said a lot of things. I let him say them. I did not interrupt. I sat in my chair and I let him talk until he was finished. And when he was finished I said two things. I said, "Richard, I am not angry." And then I said, "Richard, I am your mother, and I am going to hold you legally responsible for every document you had me sign without my genuine informed consent. And I am going to do it not because I want to hurt you but because what you did was wrong and what is wrong has consequences and the most loving thing I can do for you at this point in your life is allow you to face them." He stared at me. He started to say something. I held up my hand. I said, "You can talk to my attorney. Her name is Patricia Chun. You have her number because she sent you that paperwork this morning." He left. He went upstairs and I heard him and Melissa talking and then I heard them both come downstairs and I heard the front door and I heard his car and then the house was quiet. Really quiet. The way it used to be quiet before they moved in. The way it was quiet when it was just my house. I sat in my chair. I picked up my remote. I turned on Netflix with the password I had reset from my own email account. I found my program. I pressed play. And I drank my coffee in the quiet of my own house and I watched my show and outside the afternoon was coming through the curtains the way it always does and I was 71 years old and I was not afraid and I was not sorry and I was not sad. I was for the first time in a long time simply here. In my house. On my terms. Gerald would understand. I think he set this in motion when he told me never to throw away paper. I think somewhere in whatever quiet place Gerald is, he is nodding. He always knew the truth of things before the truth was ready to be seen. He married a woman who held on to things she did not yet know she would need, and he was wise enough to tell her to keep them, even when she did not know why. "Keep your paper," he used to say. "Keep everything. You never know." I never threw away a single document. Not one. And now I am sitting in my house on a Thursday afternoon watching my programs and a lawyer in the city is doing work that will take time but will arrive where it is going. And what is mine will remain mine, and what was taken without my knowing will be returned. My name is Barbara. I am 71 years old, and my daughter-in-law changed my Netflix password. It was the last mistake anyone in that family will make without understanding who they are making it against. I want you to think about something before you go. I want you to think about the women in your life who sign things without reading because they trust the person asking. I want you to think about the mothers who say yes before the question is finished because saying yes is the thing they have always done for the people they love. I want you to think about what happens when those women finally stop saying yes and start reading. I want you to call your grandma tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight. Call her and ask her how she is and actually listen to the answer. Ask her if anyone has had her sign anything recently. Ask her if she is okay. Ask her, really ask her. Not as a formality but as a person who loves her and wants to know. Because grandmothers know things. We have been watching and listening and keeping paper for longer than most people have been alive. We are not fragile. We are not confused. We are not too old to read or too sentimental to act. We are simply women who have loved too generously for too long, and some of us are finally learning that love does not require a signature. Where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. And if you love your grandma, if you really love her like this, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss another story. Because I have more stories, and I am just getting started.